welcome everyone to today's Allowable Ex Parte briefing. I'm going to call first on our attorney, Mr. Joseph Melchers, to read the docket.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. We are here today pursuant to notice of request for allowable ex parte briefing scheduled for today here in the Commission hearing room, April 4th, 2019 at 2 p.m. And the request was by Commissioner Howard to request that E&G conduct a briefing regarding tree trimming and potential alternatives. E&G is appearing in accordance with that request in Order 2019-3-E. And as stated, the topic is tree trimming and potential alternatives. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Melchers. Ms. Edwards from ORS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. My name is Nanette Edwards, and I am the Executive Director for the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff, and I'm here today to certify the allowable ex parte briefing that will be presented by South Carolina Electric and Gas Company and conducted in accordance with the provisions of South Carolina Code annotated Section 58-3-260C. It is my duty to certify the record of this proceeding to the Chief Clerk of the Public Service Commission, Mrs. Jocelyn Boyd. It is my duty to do so within the next 72 hours and verify that this briefing was in fact conducted in compliance with the provisions of that code section, 58-3-260C. The requirements of that statute are, in part, that the allowable ex parte briefing be confined to the subject matter that it was noticed. In this case, the subject matter is tree trimming and potential alternatives. I therefore ask that the presenters, the commissioners, and staff all please refrain from discussing any matters not related to these two topics or to this topic. Under the provisions of that statute, 58-3-260C, participants, commissioners, and commission staff are prohibited from requesting or giving any commitment, predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by any commissioner as to any ultimate or penultimate issue, which either is before or is likely to come before the commission. In short, the presenters may not ask the commissioners for anything, and the commissioners and the staff shall not give any opinion or pledge to the presenters. I ask that the presenters, commissioners, and the commission staff refrain from referencing any reports, articles, statutes, or documents of any kind that are not included in today's presentation. If it is done, a copy of any such document which is referenced during the briefing or as part of any questions or answers today must be provided to me for inclusion in the record within that 72-hour period. Finally, everyone in attendance today must read, sign, and return the form which you were given at the door when you came in today. This form must be signed by each attendee to certify that the requirements contained in 58-3-260C of the South Carolina Code have been complied with during today's presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. There, Mr. Burgess. I was hunting. I saw your name on the list, but I didn't see you. You were.
I know. I was hiding over there. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Chad Burgess. I'm in-house corporate counsel for Dominion Energy. And on behalf of the company, it's a pleasure to appear before you today. And thank you, Commissioner Howard, for extending this invitation. I've brought two presenters with me. I'll go ahead and ask these gentlemen to come on up and take their seats. Keller Kassam, who is the company's president of electric operations, and Mark Branham, who is the company's supervisor of vegetation management, maintenance, and construction. They've brought with them a slide deck today, about 24 slides. There is a video embedded in there with respect to some alternatives that are available when it comes to tree trimming. So we're going to run through that slide deck with you. I do believe, Mr. Chairman, it might be better to hold your questions until the end. It helps the flow. But if you feel inclined to ask a question during the presentation, certainly please stop us and we'll answer those questions. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kassam, unless, Mr. Chairman, you have anything of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kassam. Mr. Branham, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and fellow commissioners, I appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you today. Commissioner Howard, thank you for requesting this ex parte briefing, allowable ex parte briefing. I want to talk a little bit about our vegetation management, and we'll start at a high level and we'll work our way down all the way to a small level as far as what's going on in some of the neighborhoods that we're concerned about at this particular point. I've got a slide deck, and I'll go ahead and begin. First of all, Northeast blackout. And y'all all remember the Northeast blackout. It occurred on August the 14th of 2003. 55 million people were in the dark, and they were in the dark pretty much for about a week. As a result of this, Congress enacted legislation in which they ordered FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to develop mandatory reliability standards for utilities. In addition to that, they empowered NERC to be that electric reliability organization to develop those standards. We get audited on a regular basis by NERC and CERC, who is the local regional authority of our records as it relates to all of our electric reliability compliance. A big part of that is tree trimming. On the tree trimming side, I can tell you on some of our lines, we are subject. If you've got a transmission line in the middle of a cotton field and a vine grows up in that line and causes an outage, you're subject to a fine up to $1 million a day for every day that you allowed that vine to be there and get progressively worse and put that line out of service. Same thing applies to trees that are growing within your right-of-way, not off your right-of-way, but on your right-of-way that may fall into that line, up to $1 million a day. You've probably getting reports, and you can see that there are some utilities that have, in fact, received fines. At SC&G, we take this very seriously, and I can tell you since the implementation of this, knock on wood, we have not received any type of fine or censure or any order to go out and do any O&M activities that we aren't currently performing to protect our assets. We take this very seriously. We understand that vegetation management is a key to reliability, and we want to be in compliance with the law. 55 million customers out of power in the Northeast. Look at that satellite picture there. You can see the impact of it, and it all happened when a transmission line under load sagged down into what? Tree branches. In addition to that, Hurricane Sandy. We had a number of crews that went and worked Hurricane Sandy in the Connecticut and the Northeast area. It was one of the first times that they had a major storm come into that area. There was significant flooding. One of the big complaints you had during that time is they said it seems like the line crews are just simply sitting there and not doing any work. They're sitting in the trucks, they're talking, they're not engaged in work. The big reason for the linemen not being able to do any work is because of the tree ordinance that were in place at that time, and there were so many trees with the power lines caught in between them that the linemen could not even get to those lines until extensive vegetation removal occurred so that they could go in and do their job. What I have referenced here is a Heritage Foundation Homeland Security report that was an after action with Sandy. Everyone says, well, why don't we just put all the lines underground? Well, number one, it's inherently expensive. It costs 20 times more to put them underground. In addition to that, when there's an outage underground, and we have a lot of issues with it, with directional boring units and call before you dig, and people don't, and they dig into those lines, and there's just as much of a safety risk from underground lines as others. But in particular, as it relates to undergrounding in coastal areas, it's the intrusion of salt water from the storm surge that renders those underground facilities inoperable. I saw it after Hurricane Katrina when I went to Mississippi and those coastal areas down there that were flooded, because in that, it was a lot of flooding that went on. That was a big problem once the winds got through. It's particularly problematic if it comes at a high tide. We all see down in Charleston and Beaufort what happens when you get a prevailing wind, a high tide, and significant rain, and you can have significant flooding. In addition to that, it's important to note that after Hurricane Matthew that we had here, our barrier islands as well as Beaufort, they were impacted by that significant storm. We actually had to go in. We experienced the same storm surge and our underground facilities being rendered inoperable. And when I say inoperable, take them out of service because there's no good once that seawater gets in there around all that copper and the windings. And as a result, we actually had to run temporary overhead lines in order to get the customers back on and then eventually go back and convert those back to their original.
This is interesting. This is Coral Gables, Hurricane Irma. I think we had about 155,000 customers out after Hurricane Irma. And I think it's important to note this is a typical city, Coral Gables, Florida. And they want to impose various ordinances and tree trimming regulations and things of that nature. As soon as the storm passed, they began complaining about how long it was taking to get the power back on. And this is an actual press release from Florida Power and Light that I'll just read a couple snippets of. Our focus is on restoring power to all of our customers, and we will not be moved by self-entitled politicians who are looking for someone to blame for the city's irresponsibly managed tree program. The fact is the city of Coral Gables has for many years resisted Florida Power and Light's well-documented efforts to trim trees and harden our electrical system. Unfortunately for our customers in that area, they're now paying the price in terms of extended outages due to hundreds of trees that have fallen into our lines. More importantly, it threatens the safety of the residents of Coral Gables and the lives of the line workers who are trying to restore power. In addition to that, this pulled recently from an article in the San Francisco Chronicle. I'm sure you're all familiar with the situation going on with Pacific Gas and Electric, the largest utility in the United States, just underwent bankruptcy, and all of the fires that they've had out there in those areas, the loss of property, and unfortunately the loss of life. And this is just an article that has a mention of a judge proposes tighter tree trimming oversight for Pacific Gas and Electric. So tree trimming does produce reliability. I've been before this commission before, and we have talked about reliability, and we've talked about SAIDI, System Average Interruption Duration Index. That is what we use across the utility spectrum to measure reliability. This is the average number of minutes that a customer is out on the SC&G Dominion Energy system. And you can see where we have stacked up from 2014 to 2018. This is something we do submit on a quarterly basis here to the commission, as do our other South Carolina utility peers, and you see kind of how we stack up against them. That is an average of the other two investor-owned utilities in South Carolina. Let me give you another look at system reliability as it relates to SAIDI, because it's very important. Back in 2002, you see that average SAIDI was 176 minutes. You'll see that we dropped it down to the 134 and 145, and around that 136 there in 2003, that is when we decided we were going to develop a specific specification for trimming trees across our service territory, and we were going to stick to it because we knew that consistency would produce reliability. And you can't go and deal with one neighborhood with one spec and another neighborhood with another. You got to be consistent. Firm, fair, and consistent is what you have to be. In addition to that, I'd like to point out in 2008, we worked extensively with the Office of Regulatory Staff as well as with the Public Service Commission. And during that time, we actually received permission to go in and proactively remove some dollars out of the storm reserve and apply it to our tree trimming activities. And the way I look at that is very personal. Y'all had enough faith in us that y'all were going to allow us to remove that money from the fund and apply it to our program. Well, our program needed to produce results, and you need to get our customers needed to get a return on that particular investment. And I'll have to point out, and ORS and the Commission can take great credit for that, in your insight and vision, because in 2008, you can see when that money flowed over to our tree trimming effort, the reliability improved dramatically from 125 to 97. And take out those 2 years there in 10 and 11, you can see that we have had a sustained level of improved reliability to our customers, something that is very important and something we're very proud of. Now, how do we achieve that system reliability? Number one, and most importantly, vegetation management. Number two, our SCADA system. Y'all have heard me talk about our SCADA system before. It's like the smart grid technology that allows us to isolate faults and move load around our system, usually from our distribution dispatch area or our system control. Sometimes these switches now in certain areas, they detect the fault current and they move the system around themselves. And then finally, good old backs, arms, and knees of our linemen rising up out of bed at night to answer the call and come out in the communities where they live and get these customers' lights back on. Resiliency is another important part of the vegetation management activities. I wanted to show you from a resiliency standpoint, that means, one of the things that's good about getting a major storm, probably the only thing, it shows us that we aren't as powerful as we think we are. We can't stop it. It's coming. And the best we can do sometimes is pick up the pieces. But it's not just after the storm that the work goes in to being resilient from a storm coming in. It happens every day. On those bluebird days when we're in performing trimming in various neighborhoods, various transmission rights of way around our system. What I wanted to show you here is the various large major storms that we've had since 14. You'll be familiar with them. Winter Storm Pax, 151 outages. The restoration time on that was 5 days. That's pretty good for an ice storm. Can't stand an ice storm because it's like it never ends. You're waiting on that thermometer to go up so you get a break. Sometimes with an ice storm, you put the customers back on and you turn around and the same customers are back off again within the next couple hours. Hurricane Matthew was a large one, 290,000 customers. Restoration was 6 days. That was mainly through the Barrier Islands, Beaufort, Charleston, coming on in up almost through Columbia as well. Keep in mind with Hurricane Matthew, Hurricane Hugo, I remember working Hurricane Hugo. We had 300,000 customers out. It took us 18 days to restore power after it. Now, of course, with Matthew in 16, we have a heck of a lot more customers than we did back when Hugo came through in 89. Irma, 155,000 customers back in 4 days. That's where your tree trimming really pays off. And then, of course, Hurricane Michael, 72,000 customers. We got them back on within a day. Here's an example of Winter Storm Pax. This is Boundary Lane in Aiken. And you see the oaks that line Boundary Lane. And believe it or not, there's a power line that runs through there and cut to the right specifications. There's that same street, Boundary Lane, after Winter Storm Pax came through there in Aiken. In addition to that, it's important to understand that after the power is out, anything over 10,000 customers, I'm communicating with the Office of Regulatory Staff, the executive director, who has a direct feed to the governor. Governor Haley did a tremendous job of supporting us through these storms, but she had one requirement for us, and that was let us know by county when you expect to have 95% of the customers who can take power, meaning those that don't have structural damage to their homes, when 95% of them are back on. So the biggest focus becomes then getting the lights back on. People don't talk too much about tree trimming at that time other than get my power back on. And at that time, once you hit about the 48th hour of being in the dark, you don't have any complaints about trimming trees at that particular time. But this was in Aiken. We had a press conference there as well as in Walterboro, and there were probably 115 people, 120 people that were in the audience there. You see some various political individuals there as well. And the big question they ask is, why is my power out, and when is it coming back on? And the greatest groan that came out of that group when I had to honestly tell them is, I believe the last person's lights will be back on in the end of the week, which was about 5 to 6 days. It's important. People say, well, and there have been various articles. There was one article written that was in the local paper that said SC&G takes a chainsaw to its already ragged reputation. Immediately that was picked up by someone on social media who tagged to that article and said, I believe we ought to take into consideration our Second Amendment rights as we protect our property and our trees. And that's when it gets dangerous. And that's when it gets dangerous for the personnel that are out there trying to perform these duties. It's also dangerous for the customers that come around and gather around the trucks while they're trying to complete their work. It's not a good situation whatsoever. But I did want to point out our general terms and conditions. And I think some people miss this as far as us providing them electric or gas service. And it reads as follows. The customer in requesting or accepting service thereby grants the company, without charge, necessary rights of way and trimming and clearing privileges for its facilities along, across, and under property controlled by the customer to the extent that such rights of way and trimming and clearing privileges for its facilities along, across, and under property controlled by the customer are required, necessary, or convenient to enable company to supply service to the customer, and the customer also grants the company the right to continue to extend the company's facilities on, across, or under property controlled by the customer with necessary trimming and clearing rights to serve other customers. You know, it's really about public safety. That's our number one priority, and that's what we're about. With the 26,000 miles of lines and services that we have throughout our service territory, it's about public safety. You know, the biggest thing when we have a storm, you see everybody say, don't go near down power lines. That's what we talk about. But one of the biggest risks that you have is people digging around energized cable under the ground or people climbing up in trees. And we've had situations where folks climbing up in trees, and they say, well, don't cut the tree. Leave the tree there. But it's a matter of public safety. July of 1995, we had 2 children that climbed a magnolia tree on James Island. They weighted the limb down and made contact with primary conductor. One lost an arm and had permanent leg injury. The other one had severe burns and scarring. The second one also suffered severe burns and scarring, as well as psychological trauma. In Charleston, again, in August of 2003, 2 children were playing up in a tree. A third was down on the ground. They made contact with an energized line while up in the tree and weighing down the limb. They both had burns and scarring, and one had permanent injuries to his feet where there was an exit wound from that standpoint. The one that was down at the tree suffered from, at the bottom of the tree that witnessed it all, little girl there, witnessed post-traumatic stress disorder. It is about public safety when we talk about why we go and do it. It's also about employee safety, which is very important. November 16th, 2006. I remember that date better than I do my own birthday. I got a call at 4:30 that morning. A journeyman lineman was working out of Barnwell, and he's working a storm between Denmark and Bamberg. He went up in the bucket, and when he went up in the bucket, there was a transformer pole there that had a transformer on it that was shrouded in vegetation. He reached out to clear the vegetation and didn't realize that the stinger wire on the transformer, which is the small wire that comes off the hot primary and comes down into the transformer, it's called a stinger wire. You can see them if you look up there. But he got on it at the same time that his other hand was on the pole ground, meaning that copper wire that is stapled to the pole all the way to the ground and wrapped around the butt down 4 feet in the ground. Electricity went through 2 pinholes in his hand, like a snake bite. Electricity coursed through his body, hemorrhaged his aorta, and blew out his left arm from his elbow past his fingertips. I had to go to the Bamberg Hospital and meet his grandmother and his mother and let them both know that he was inside, but he had passed away because he was dead before they got to the hand controls and brought him down in the bucket. In addition to that, I then had to go to Sawdust Lane, and I had to sit down with his wife and 2 young boys and let them know that their father and husband was not coming home. 4 days later, right before Thanksgiving, I had the responsibility of eulogizing him in front of some 300 people at Voorhees Gymnasium and catered the repast for that community. And it struck me just how much this community recognizes and depends on these linemen who live in these communities, who they know is going to go out and answer the call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sometimes the customers call them. It doesn't even go through distribution dispatch. They have such a great relationship with them, they'll call them and let them know the power is out. So people ask, why do you cut trees? That's why I cut trees. Because I think about that employee every single morning when I pray to the Lord to please keep my employees safe who work the 6th most dangerous job in the world. Because guess what? I'm responsible. I'm responsible for him being in that situation. I'm responsible for him not being here any longer. And it's the toughest thing I've ever had to deal with in my life. And not a day goes by that I don't think about that when it comes to how we maintain and operate this system in order to serve others. Now, that's the reason why I've got Mr. Mark Branham here. He's boots on the ground. He's mad at me for having to wear a coat and tie because he's usually out there in the trenches every day, every single day. A lot of times people knock my foresters and say, well, they don't have qualifications. They need to be second-guessed by a certified arborist. I'll use Mr. Branham as an example. He has a degree from Clemson University in Forest Resource Management. Clemson, we hire a lot of engineers from Clemson, and they do an outstanding job of preparing their graduates in engineering to be able to pass the PE exam and be professional engineers on our system. They prepare them for that during their 4-year degree. Clemson does an equally great job of preparing foresters so that they too can be certified arborists. Because with the foresters we're hiring now, it's not just important that they understand how to be good foresters, but they have that arborist qualification as well so they can work in these urban areas and preserve the health of the tree. In addition to that, he's registered through South Carolina Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation, through the Board of Registration for Foresters, and he also has his commercial certified pesticide applicator license as well. They call him a forester. I call him my number one guy for public safety and employee safety. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Branham.
All right. Thank you, Keller, for the introduction. And commissioners, I really thank you for the opportunity to be here today to speak to you. A little background on myself. I graduated in 2009 from Clemson University. And I actually started out as a co-op student while attending Clemson, and I've been with SCE&G ever since. So again, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we'll talk about our distribution line clearance specifications. So we have to have a minimum of 10 feet of clearance to the side of our outermost primary conductor. And when I talk about conductors, I mean the top wires. So you have, it could be a single phase, a 2-phase, or a 3-phase. So those are your primary conductors. And then the line below that's the neutral. So we have to have a minimum of 20 feet of clearance above our highest primary conductor, and we have to have a minimum of 10 feet of clearance below our bottom primary conductor. We also trim out service lines, and typically we only trim services for abrasion, and that would include anything that is rubbing really hard on that service. One important thing to note is certain conditions will exist that preclude those clearances we just talked about. Significant size parent limbs and leaders and large trunks that could be located less than 10 feet from the outermost primary conductor. So in those situations, we are okay to leave those. Next slide. This next slide is a figure that was taken out of the ISA Utility Pruning BMPs manual. And it does a good job illustrating why we have minimum clearances versus stating a maximum clearance. So if you look in the picture, again, the top 3 wires are your primary conductors, and you'll see a measurement where you got 10 feet to the side of that primary. So this as an example, if I were to make a cut right at 10 feet, what you would be left with is a big stub on that tree. And what a stub can do is it's a pathway for insects, disease, rot, and decay to enter the tree. And it's just a really bad situation for the trees. And if we did that, I mean, we'd have a bunch of unhealthy trees out there. So that's definitely not what we want. But the figure actually reads, it states to remove whole branches when practical, and when clearance distances are specified, in this case 10 feet, the cut should be made at the next suitable lateral or parent limb beyond the stated distance. Next slide. This next slide, I wanted to put this in here to highlight all of the community engagement we do down in Charleston and other places, but this just focuses on Charleston. And I'm from Charleston. I've lived there my whole entire life. And I really know how passionate people are about trees, including myself. So we really want to reach out to the public. We want to educate the residents, the customers, as well as our municipal staffs. So just to highlight a few of these, in 2017, we held a Riverland Terrace community workshop to discuss needed upgrades to our primary distribution system. And we also talked about tree trimming at this meeting. And it was a really good attendance. We had between 80 and 100 folks attend this meeting. We then met with the City of Charleston in 2018 to review our trimming plans. If we get down to 2018, we held a public workshop at Charlestown Landing to review our 2018 trimming plans. We then met with the James Island PSD to review the 2019 trimming plans. We also met with the Town of James Island, Charleston County, and the City of Charleston in December to review 2019 trimming plans. Then we'll move into 2019, and we held a public tree trimming demonstration on January 14th, 2019. It was within the City of Charleston, and it was well attended by residents as well as municipal staff. We had the City of Charleston arborist there as well as Charleston County arborist, and that was also well attended. We then held a public workshop at the Town of James Island Municipal Building on February 7th, and we reviewed our 2019 trimming plans with residents to discuss proper pruning techniques and educate customers regarding safety around overhead power lines. One thing to note is that the tree trimming demo, we always start off by talking about safety. And the first topic we talk about is safety in the work zone. And what our contractors do is they set out cones as far as a work zone and an area that people cannot enter. So that's the first thing we do. And then we'll talk about proper pruning techniques. And then we'll actually have the contractor prune the tree. So it's a good time for residents and municipal staff to see what the tree looks like before and then what the tree looks like after pruning. Next slide. All right, this is another figure that was taken out of the ISA Utility Best Management Practices Handbook. This slide, it really does a good job showing our most common examples of what trees look like after they're directionally pruned. Essentially, what we talk about when we say directional pruning is we want to train the tree to grow away from the power line. So essentially, you're removing vegetation growing towards the primary conductors, and you're leaving the limbs growing away. So that's why you end up with these V-shaped trees and L-shaped trees. We get a lot of feedback when customers see V and L-shaped trees. They say this tree is butchered, but the tree is not butchered. That's actually a national standard way to prune a tree for utility lines. So directional pruning is the best option for utility pruning and the best option for a healthy tree. Next slide. All right, the next few slides I wanted to put these in there to show our consistency from cycle to cycle with our trimming. The first picture on the left is a Google Street View of a tree on Savannah Highway. So this tree was actually trimmed in 2013, and the Google Street View is of the same tree 2 years later. And then if you go over to the picture on the right, this tree was actually trimmed in 2018, so this is a present-day picture. Now, if you look at the structure of the trees, they're very similar from cycle to cycle, and you really can't tell a difference in the trimming. So I thought that was just a good example of consistency with our trimming from cycle to cycle. We have the same situation here. This is Frampton Avenue in Riverland Terrace. This particular tree, the one on the left, that's a Google Street View in 2015. The tree was actually trimmed in 2014. And then if you look at the picture on the right, I took that picture a week ago after the trimming that just occurred. So again, you see that's a live oak tree with very similar structure, really no apparent changes in trimming. And again, this is the same situation in Riverland Terrace on Wapu Hall Drive. It's a big live oak that's been directionally pruned to take on that V shape. So the Google Street View is in 15. That tree was trimmed in 14. And then the picture on the right is our present trimming, and I actually took that picture last week as well. One thing I did want to point out is there is a structural leader on that tree that's probably 8 feet from our primary line, and that would just be a good example of a situation like a large parent limb or leader where we don't always get our full stated 10 feet to the side of our primary. All right, and this slide, it really shows why we do what we do. You know, we really want to be proactive and maintain our 5-year cycle, and we really want to just trim these trees before they pose a risk like this. This is a very dangerous situation of a large limb burning in a primary, not only for outages but for safety. So that just illustrates why we do what we do.
Next, I'm going to show you a video. We talked this allowable ex parte briefing is to look at options. We talked a little bit about why we trim and how we trim, but now we want to look at options where we've had success in dealing in neighborhoods. Now, if you're in the city, you got a franchise, and we can work underneath that franchise on a non-standard service fund, and we've been very successful on that. In the last 5 years, we've spent close to $20 million on projects within our cities. So it's not like we're not undergrounding and converting our system, but we work hand in hand in a team with the cities underneath that franchise in order to accomplish that. And it'll explain in the video how it works from a mechanics standpoint as well as a financial standpoint. We've got some challenges as well, because if you don't have a franchise in the city and you're in the county, then you're going to have to work that out. But I'm confident we can work that out as well. So this video is fairly self-explanatory, but if y'all indulge me, please.
This is Mathis Ferry Road in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. It's a historic and scenic passageway lined with beautiful grand live oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. It's also a roadway filled with overhead distribution power lines running through those large oaks. In order to maintain reliable power for residents that live on Mathis Ferry Road, SCE&G performs necessary pruning and trimming of those trees on a 4 to 5 year cycle. Concerned residents wanted to find solutions that would put an end to the tree trimming and preserve the aesthetics of their community.
Mathis Ferry Road is a gem, and it's a scenic highway. It was designated a scenic highway, and for the neighborhoods that live along here, it's definitely something to be proud of. It's a shady straightaway, and it provides a pleasant biking, walking path that everyone really appreciates. And so it was important when it came time to deal with tree issues that we find some solution that was going to meet the needs of the neighborhoods.
You can imagine when the necessary pruning had to begin, how many individuals are very concerned, contacted their local elected representatives, contacted people they knew within the government at Town Hall, and that really prompted us to go ahead and find a solution.
Trying to find a permanent solution to this issue led to lengthy discussions between the town of Mount Pleasant, SCE&G, and the surrounding communities along Mathis Ferry Road. How could SCE&G continue to provide reliable service to its customers while balancing aesthetics and quality of life the municipality and the community strive for? The answer? Placing the overhead distribution power lines underground by utilizing a special fund.
We were getting a large number of email complaints and phone complaints about the tree trimming in and around that area. Primarily, what really stirs the most problem with our residents are the trimming of what we call grand oaks. I mentioned, how do we fix this problem? I mean, instead of having to revisit this issue every 4 or 5 years, can't we come up with a real solution?
Most cities or towns that SCE&G serves have a fund available for burying those lines. It's called a Non-Standard Service Fund. The fund works as follows. A municipality designates a percentage of the franchise fee paid to them by SCE&G. SCE&G then matches that amount dollar for dollar, and the fund builds. It's then up to the city to prioritize what projects it wants to undertake and utilize those funds. Customers may also incur part of the cost associated with the project, including a portion of the main undergrounding, the cost of an underground service line, new streetlights, and a conversion cost depending on the project.
And the concept actually was developed in 1996, and it started with the City of Charleston franchise agreement. They essentially identified the same issue, and then as we went through and did franchise agreement renewals with the municipalities that we serve in South Carolina, we perfected the language in a way that I think worked well for both parties, the municipalities as well as SCE&G, and it was done in a way that offered an option for folks that wanted to do projects where they took overhead and replaced it with underground.
The Non-Standard Service Fund is not an unlimited resource. Municipalities have to select when and how they use it to benefit their community. Mount Pleasant has identified major transportation corridors and has already utilized the fund. Coleman Boulevard is a good example. Overhead lines on a portion of that route are now non-existent through the use of the Non-Standard Service Fund. Some areas on Highway 17 have benefited from the same methodology, and the community notices. Going from overhead power lines to underground lines can be a lengthy process, and there are many factors to consider if it can in fact be done, and at what cost. Once all factors are analyzed and agreed upon, the actual conversion can begin. Underground construction for the lines, switchgear, and pad-mounted equipment installation takes place. Equipment that will ultimately replace the overhead lines will be placed along the area as well. Once the underground system is energized and the switch is made, the poles and the overhead lines are removed.
Knowing that there's funding in place to do this kind of thing, to protect these kinds of beautiful scenic highways in South Carolina and the Low Country in general, it's an opportunity there to be taken and to be taken advantage of for the betterment of the community long term.
Now, one of the beauties of the non-standard service fund methodology is that the burden doesn't rest just with the company and ultimately back to the ratepayers. It's a situation where the town takes part of what they already receive from the company in a franchise fee and utilize that to offset some of the costs. So when it ends up, you have a shared project.
I think we'll continue to utilize the non-standard portion of our service agreement. We've used it very successfully over time, and we continue to plan on doing so. And with SCE&G as a partner, I see it continuing for a long time.
It's obviously going to be wonderful for us, and I fully intend that we will continue this process when and where we can. And I would just say that, why wouldn't you? It's a wonderful opportunity to do something great for your community, and it's available, and you know, it's what a wonderful partnership between SCE&G and the town of Mount Pleasant.
So that video kind of gives you an understanding of how we have utilized the non-standard service fund within our franchises in order to work, but it takes a team concept. This is Boundary Street, not to be confused with Boundary Lane in Aiken, but in South Carolina we have a lot of boundary streets. But it just shows you the removal of overhead lines there. And that picture is rather symbolic of everybody that has to come together in order to make it work. SC&G can't do it alone. The city can't do it alone. The county can't do it alone, and the homeowners can't do it alone. But if everybody comes together and sets aside their differences, we can find safe and reliable solutions to deal with some of the matters that we do have at play here. But it goes without saying that as long as you have trees and as long as you have power lines, inevitably there's going to be the need to maintain that system on an ongoing basis. And conflicts are going to arise. But I think the gentleman said it best in that video. How can we explain and how can we get people to understand and buy in so we don't have this fight every 5 years that we go around to do our circuit trimming? That concludes the report that Mr. Branham and I have for the commission. I sincerely appreciate your time and your attention, and we both are available to ask any questions at the discretion of the commission. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Kassam and Mr. Branham, for that report. Commissioners, questions? Let's see. Commissioner Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your presentation was excellent, and I'm sure it's something that you could be proud of. Let me ask you one. The one question is the loop between the two of you sitting here today and the contractor on the ground. Do they have the understanding that you presented to this commission today as what they should be doing and how they should be conducting?
Yes, sir. They absolutely do. They have specs in our contract that they have to follow, and all those stated clearances that we talked about are in our contract.
Do y'all have a person online to check and make sure they're following the proper procedures?
Yes, sir. Part of the forester's job is to do field inspections and final inspections. So as the work is going on, myself and another forester, we routinely look at the work out in the field while it's being performed. And actually, when they finish a project, we do a final inspection to make sure everything is compliant.
Thank you very much.
And I will add, Commissioner Hamilton, that is like a punch. We call it a punch list when they finish up. So there's a punch list, and there are numerous times that we have those contractors come back if there's anything that they missed or didn't cut to a spec. So it's during the course of that trimming work, but it's also a punch list where these foresters review the entire circuit, typically with the supervision of that crew, and then so direct the activities to make sure it's in accordance with our specifications contained within the contract.
And the homeowners that want underground service, you've got a program that their percentage of the cost would be approximately what percentage?
It varies, Commissioner Hamilton, from project to project. It all depends. For example, some of the areas of Riverland Terrace down in Charleston, you have a single-phase line. If you looked in the video, you see some pretty robust three-phase lines. So likewise, when you start undergrounding it, that cost can vary based upon the infrastructure that you're placing into service. The biggest challenge is getting everybody on the same page. One of the neighborhoods in Charleston we did was the Crescent. It took 20 years. People sell houses back and forth, and they are obligated in order to, you've got to pay to convert your meter can. Remember, if you get overhead service, it's going to come in to the stub sticking up there to the service coming there, to the weatherhead they call it. Well, when you go to underground, you're going to have to pay an electrician to change out your meter can so that you have a 90-degree elbow, coming up underneath that meter can to bring that underground service. The video referenced street lights. That's another thing that has to be done. And then the most difficult thing of all is the placement of switch gear and pad-mounted transformers. You saw that switch gear when they were in the video, the picture of it, and the pad-mounted transformers, because nobody wants it in their yard, but they're completely fine for you to put it in their neighbor's yard. And so what happens is you go from a single-phase line in a tree canopy that, as Mr. Branham demonstrated to you, that's kind of out of sight, out of mind. It becomes intrusive when we go and trim these trees. And then, of course, it becomes apparent to everyone in the neighborhood. Well, when you make that step and everybody decides, well, I want to go underground, then sometimes it's like, well, be careful what you ask for, because then you've still got to site those underground structures in people's yards, and they become more in contact with them when they're parking their cars, when they're driving, when they're running their lawnmowers, weed eating. Don't plant anything in front of them within 12 feet because you got to get in there with a shotgun stick to grab those elbows and pull them out when you're switching load around. So there are requirements that come with the underground, and it can be intrusive as well. But it just takes everybody working together. And we've got a long track record of working with municipalities and customers. Now, you may be talking about an individual customer that says, I want a hybrid service run to my house. In other words, I got backlot overhead, and I want to run underground into my home. Well, that's an expense to be borne by the homeowner there. So we're talking here about neighborhoods, streets, and things of that nature that is typically taken on by the county. But at the same time, we have individual homeowners that may want it underground at their home for one reason or another.
Well, thank you both for your presentation. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard.
I do appreciate your presentation. Learned a lot. But we still have a problem. And will you tell me what your situation is now with the City of Charleston as far as the moratorium? Where are you with the City of Charleston?
Where we are with the City of Charleston, underneath the franchise, they asked us to pause tree trimming, and we did. And I'll tell you, I'm not in favor of that, because we're getting to the end of a 5-year cycle, and we're getting into storm season. And we would have had it trimmed out prior to storm season coming in, but it's coming. And you've got a 5-year cycle there where you've got these branches that are in close proximity to these electric lines. But we did pause, and we're currently working with them on an agreement. We used to have an agreement a long time ago. That agreement has since expired. It didn't have an evergreen on it. It had a term on it, and we're working right now. Danny Cassis, who was in that video as well, is working with the city of Charleston to come up with an agreement so we can begin trimming again. In certain areas, the city has notified us by various means, and I'm not familiar with exactly how they're going about doing it. The city of Charleston, the way they hand their franchises, they have a list of projects, okay, that they have, and they take them as they come, and they work through the franchise just as it was described in the video for the non-standard service fund, and they take them as they come. The city of Columbia, likewise, they've done a lot. 5 Points, North Main, the Vista. They've spent their money in various ways such as that. You saw Boundary Street there in Beaufort. So the city of Charleston asked us to pause, and we paused. And we are working on that agreement at this time. In addition to that, we're working with Charleston County because some of these neighborhoods, particularly in Riverland Terrace, I mean, the circuit doesn't know where the county and city lines are, so you've got some incorporated in with the county as well. And Danny Cassis has been working with the county as well to come up with an agreement. In fact, I think he emailed it to me today. And so he's working on an agreement in that regard as well. So if we believe that the county and the city is willing to work with us on a funding for underground, and they can get the property owners within there to agree to conversion of their meter can, location of switchgear and pad-mounted transformers, then we are willing to relax our specifications in those areas in order to be able to work it out. And so that means we won't trim to the clearances Mr. Branham described for you. But understand this, if we're unable to work it out, we will go back in towards the end of the year and we will cut to the full specifications Mr. Branham described. That's where we stand with the city of Charleston. That's where we stand with Charleston County in those particular areas.
The agreement with Charleston County have a pause in it?
It does not have a pause in it, but we do have a franchise, and we collect franchise fees and we pay franchise fees. And just as we can go in and take out money for non-standard service fund, then if they cause us from a mobilization standpoint, because we're scrambling right now to keep these crews busy. And the problem is with these crews, if they aren't working, they're going to work somewhere else. They're going to find work. And it may be out of the state. And in the event that they go out of the state, then we won't be able to get them back.
I think Commissioner Belcher wants.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but he asked about Charleston County. Do you have a franchise agreement with Charleston County?
No, ma'am, the city of Charleston.
Okay, he asked about Charleston County. That's why I'm confused.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. We do not have a franchise. I appreciate that, Commissioner Belser. Thank you. We do not have a franchise with Charleston County. We do pay taxes into, property taxes into Charleston County. That's our relationship with them. But no, sir, we do not have a franchise agreement. The agreement that I was talking about, Commissioner Belser, has to do with an agreement Mr. Cassis is working on as it relates to our tree trimming and the potential for doing an engineering and design study on the undergrounding of our facilities there. Thank you.
I guess my mindset is there any variance can be offered because the area has a historical or scenic highway designation? I mean, can you lessen the cuts, like you mentioned you might be able to do, that you had some discretion on the discretion yours, or the discretion FERC or NERC? Who sets these standards?
Yeah, so we do take into consideration, like we talked about, those large parent limbs and leaders. And on these big, large live oaks that everybody sees in Charleston, that is what we take into consideration. But we are following the American National Standards Institute ANSI A300 standards, and we also comply with the ISA utility pruning best management practices.
I would call it a hot issue. There's any designation you want. We're talking about historical. We're talking about scenic highways. We're talking about that. Out of the 26,000 miles of distribution line you said, Mr. Kassan?
Yes, sir, and services.
How many feet or miles are we talking about in Charleston County and Charleston of what I would call the hot issue areas? I mean, Are we talking 100 miles? Are we talking 50 miles? Are we talking 10 miles?
Well, it's so spread out. I mean, it's in Mount Pleasant. I mean, it's on James Island. It's in Johns Island. It's in Somerville. It's in Aiken. It's in Columbia. So it's spread out, so it's really hard to pin down exactly what the mileage is. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
I guess for my parochial interest, I'd be talking about Charleston right now. Just Riverland Terrace, Burns Down, Avondale, those areas that are really pretty vocal about it now. Is it any? I guess my question is, number one, is there anything you can do with variance? Maybe cut less, but cut more often. And I know you got a budget question with that, but it seems like something can be done. And I personally don't have the answer, but it's a concern.
Well, I think something can be done. I think we demonstrated that in the presentation that we have put $20 million worth of projects underground in the last 5 years. And if someone wants to work with us, then I think what you do is you start with one street as a pilot and see if you are successful. But at the same time, I can't speak for the city or much less the county on how they'd like to allocate funds towards that. When it comes to trimming the trees, we're going to cut it to the specification. There's too much risk on the other end from a liability standpoint and a risk standpoint and a safety standpoint for both our employees and the public. Now, Mr. Branham described in his cuts, when we deal with those grand trees, he may get 6 feet of clearance. He may get 8 feet of clearance. So we already get it. And we've been trimming those trees for a long time. He demonstrated in his photos that, everybody says, well, you're cutting more than you've ever cut in the past. The photos clearly show that we are not, that he had up there. And in addition to that, we got to be consistent with how we treat our customers. And that, ever since I came over to the electric side, that's what I do. So if somebody knows somebody or somebody knows me or calls me up and things of that nature, it's got to be consistent and it's got to be fair to our customers, regardless of where they live, regardless of how much money they have, or regardless of what influence they have. The safety aspects of it are first and primary in my mind. So we have a mechanism. Mr. Cassis is working nonstop with the county as well as the city to try to broker some arrangement where we can show flexibility and we can show variance. But when it comes to the trimming, we've got to cut it to a consistent standard. If not, then the whole thing blows up and we're not cutting to a standard anywhere. What prevents somebody in the rural community where I grew up, in Calhoun County, from saying, well, I want my tree cut like you've cut them in Riverland Terrace? Because because you cut it like that, cut it here. And I don't have an answer for that.
Well, my first answer would be a historical or scenic designation. I think so basically, even though it's a historical or scenic designation, any other designation, that doesn't have anything to do with, and you're going to say the safety is the same in Calhoun County as in Riverland Terrace. But then again, I don't know that that's the true statement.
Yes, sir, and I respect that. Yes, sir.
Mr. Sam,
but I would say that the trees themselves offer up what Mr. Brannon tried to describe was where they have the large leaders, which are what these grand trees have. We don't cut them, and we already allow them to be at a different specification as we would some other tree.
I guess what I want to say is, and I'll say it, what do we have to do to get the ball in motion? What do we have to do? I see Mr. Cassis out there. What do we have to do what you're suggesting we do? Meet with the cities, meet with the counties, and Mr. Cassis probably, as you said, has already done that, but I don't want it dropped. I mean, I think we need to do it, and I guess my attitude is that is the great modern American philosopher, Larry the Cable Guy, let's just get it done.
Yes, sir. I like Larry the Cable Guy, too. And I will tell you, you're exactly right, and that's what it's got to take. It's got to take an agreement so that we can engineer and design, and we'll put it underground. We'll put it underground. but we've got to have a funding mechanism. We've got one in the franchise, as Commissioner Belser pointed out. We don't have it with the county. But you got to allocate funds in order to work with us in order to get it done. And that's what we've got to focus on to do. And we can get it done.
Have you studied any other funding methods besides the non-standard service fund? I'm thinking about funds like streetscapes and, beautification of neighborhoods and all that. The funds available for that could that be a possibility of a source for going underground?
That would certainly be up to the jurisdiction that is there, the county or the city. And we'd be happy to work with either one of them and even the neighborhood associations at times in order to achieve this objective.
That's one other question. When you have these town hall meetings, do you notify ORS so they can have a representative at the town hall meetings?
Yes, sir. We actually had a representative from the ORS attend our Town of Mount Pleasant tree trimming workshop.
Well, if you hadn't, I was going to encourage you to have ORS at your meeting. And again, thank you for your presentation, and we'll follow up sometime soon and see how we're doing.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Commissioner Belzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
I apologize for my voice this afternoon and ask you to bear with me. I noticed in the video that I believe it was one of the Mount Pleasant councilmen said we revisit this every 4 to 5 years, and it seems like I'm hearing about it every 4 to 5 years, whether it's Columbia or Charleston or Aiken. So anything that we can do to get this thing resolved. But a couple of questions that I had. Looking at your slide deck, I'm at the slide that talks about distribution line clearing specifications. It's right after Mr. Branham's qualifications, I believe. And it says a minimum of 10-foot clearance to the side from the outermost primary conductor, minimum of 20 clearance above the highest primary conductor. Am I understanding you that when there's a large leader, we're talking about a large, perhaps vertical limb going up on the tree? Is that what you're referring to as a large leader?
That's correct.
Okay. Y'all are not cutting to those specs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
It would have to be significant in size in order to leave it.
Okay. And how far down in the canopy are you going? Because I'm new to the commission, Mr. Branham, but the electric lines are up on the top, right? And then a lot of poles will have telephone and cable TV lines below that. Are y'all cutting below those lines that aren't y'all's?
Yeah, well, we have to have a minimum of 4 feet below our neutral.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, can we look at one of your pictures? I'm looking at the one from Savannah Highway. So that one. And I'm just because it's easier for me to see the picture on the right, that really thick black line at the bottom. That's cable TV, is it not?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. So where is your neutral that you have to cut 4 foot below?
So on that particular line, if you look up top, you'll see 3 lines up top.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go down to where the transformer's at,
right,
you'll see another silver line. That's the neutral. So we have to have a minimum of 4 feet below the neutral. But as I was talking about, we say minimum because in order to comply with ANSI standard and not leave a stub, sometimes you have to go beyond that to make a proper cut.
Okay. And I think that, I know when all this started, I was driving downtown Columbia and saw some crews out, and I was just like, really? Because you just start looking at some of these cuts. But, okay, there's on that one. You mentioned, Mr. Kassam, you discussed that in some areas undergrounding is not appropriate, and the saltwater intrusion and the flooding. And when that started, I was kind of like, are they saying it can't be undergrounded in Charleston? But in Mount Pleasant, I mean, they're in the same situation. So it's all a matter of funding. Is that where we are?
Oh, really? I mean, it can be engineered, designed, it can be constructed anywhere.
Okay.
I mean, it can be in the coastal areas. A lot of the new development is on the water, and most of that's underground. New construction is underground.
New construction in the subdivision, or the line E&G's lines going into the subdivision?
Typically, it's within the subdivision.
Okay.
It depends on how big that subdivision is. You've got Dunes West and Park West, where we have express feeders that go to those subdivisions, and then they dip underground, and then they serve the various phases of that subdivision all underground. That's typically how it works.
That's what it's being built initially, is it not?
Yes, ma'am.
It's a little more difficult once an area is built up and you're trying to convert.
That's correct. I mean, you can go out there in a neighborhood with these live oaks, and I can tell you, people look at the canopy of a tree. The way you kill a tree or any plant is to mess with the roots. And you can go out there and start directionally boring, and you'll stick a bore stem on the ground on one side of those trees, and it just doesn't come out the other side. So you got to be very conscious and careful about what you do. When I was talking about the underground facilities having saltwater intrusion from storm surge, that was usually after storms. However, we still build in those areas where you have subdivisions. We still put the facilities underground.
On the Charleston Community Engagement slide, I noticed in the 2017 activities with regard to the Riverland Terrace workshop, it states to discuss needed upgrades to the primary distribution system. What upgrades are we talking about?
That system is an old 4 kV system. That's the only way with the close proximity of the trees it stays in. So when it gets a contact, it's at a lower voltage, and it usually doesn't trip out as much. It'll handle a little bit of contact. If we uprated it to our normal distribution system, that would be a 23 kV system, and that's what is the typical voltage on our distribution system. It's an antiquated system.
Have those upgrades been done yet? That was 2 years ago.
No, ma'am.
Is that something that could be taken into account? Since you're looking at upgrades anyway, that could be a sharing of cost perhaps, or something going forward?
We're willing to work on anything that we can to broker a solution, and that certainly could be part of the discussion.
Is Riverland Terrace is that James Island?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so is that county or is that city?
County and city. That's why I kind of did the double dance with you and Commissioner Howard on that, because these lines don't know the municipal limits, and so some of it's county and some of it's city, which makes this a unique situation in order to try to resolve.
Well, I reckon from what I'm hearing, it's probably easier for Mr. Cassis dealing with the city because of the franchise agreement.
That is correct.
Okay. Is there someone on county council or in county government that is on this issue and discussing it with him?
Yes, there is.
I've kind of jotted a lot of notes down here. I don't mean to jump around too much, but it looks like I am, and I apologize. We had a number of pictures. Are there any that are? Do you have any of what's going on in Riverland Terrace or what's happening now?
In the pictures?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. If we look right there, that's actually a tree on Frampton Avenue, right in the heart of Riverland Terrace.
And so the picture on the right is the current one. Is that correct?
That's correct. I took that picture last week, I believe.
Are additional workshops or additional public discussion opportunities needed to at least let the residents know that y'all are hearing them and trying to work through something? I mean, it's just that people just see people cutting, or see the linemen or the crews out there cutting, and nobody likes to see that. So, I mean, are the workshops in close enough proximity to alert the residents what's coming into their area? Or
yes, ma'am. We give them plenty of advance notice for the workshops.
Okay. But for the workshops, once the workshops are done, do they know a timeline of when you might be coming into their neighborhood so that they're not shocked all of a sudden to see the crews out there?
Yes, ma'am. At the workshop, we have a large map, typically 34 by 44, showing the overhead electric lines. Mm-hmm. And when we're speaking with customers, we try to talk about the schedule. And one of the biggest questions we get asked is when will you be at my house? And we do try to estimate that for them. But we also let them know that there is a 1-800 number they can call in if they have any questions or concerns as a customer service number.
Is there anything on the E&G website about alerts for tree trimming going on and that customers can log in and look and see what areas are coming up?
We have a tree trimming page that goes over our general trimming practices, but we don't typically have maps and estimates on that trimming page.
I mean, you certainly have qualifications, and you have someone else. Oh, you said another forester on staff, but what about the crews that are actually out there doing the trimming? What are their qualifications other than Dave's tree service? Because these are all contracted, aren't they not?
Yes, ma'am.
So they're qualified line clearance arborists, and through OSHA, they have the training where they're legally permitted to work within 10 feet of a power line. So they have in-house ongoing training to be able to do that work.
For the safety aspect.
For the safety, and they do in-house pruning.
In-house within their company, or y'all in-house in the E&G?
I'd say both.
Okay, y'all go over standards and.
Yes, ma'am. Before we start a project, we generally meet with the general foreman and the tree foremans, and we have discussions about our specs.
Okay, when you say a project, is a project all of Charleston, the city of Charleston, or Charleston County, or is a project a neighborhood?
A project's typically an area.
Okay, how big an area?
For example, the James Island project, it's right at 71 miles, okay. And Riverland Terrace is approximately 7 or 8 of those miles.
And how long did you estimate that project would take?
I think we're looking at the end of August, September before we finish that entire 71 miles.
Okay, so that gets me back to how are customers notified that it's coming to their area? We're in April. It started in February or March, and it's not going to be finished till August. So really people don't have a good idea of when they might see folks in their neighborhood, do they?
Yes, ma'am, they do, because what we do is break up the project into sections, and tied to that section is a postcard notification that SCE&G sends out, giving the customer notice that tree crews will be in their area soon.
Perfect. How far in advance does that go out?
It's a minimum of 2 weeks, but sometimes we try to get them out 3-4 weeks ahead of time.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's about it right now. I appreciate y'all being here and bringing this information to us. Thank you very much. But like Commissioner Howard and I think the other commissioners, we sure hope that y'all will continue working with the county and the city. I just remember last time when it happened over in Shandon, what was that, 5 or 6 years ago?
6 years ago, I remember it well.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, this was the other thing. You mentioned that the city and the county both had arborists on their staffs. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How closely do y'all work with them? Do they have to sign off on anything, or do they get to look at your project to see if they have any concerns that they can bring to your attention or anything?
Yeah, they're welcome to go out and look at our work at any time they want, and typically we do consult with them on an ongoing basis throughout the year.
How about on the planning stage? Do they have input?
They don't have input on our clearance specs or our specifications.
I understand that, but just as far as when you're rolling out your project and as the project is ongoing. I know the specs are set by ANSI and others, but are they involved other than just to say, welcome to Charleston?
Yeah, they're involved, and like this year, for the trimming this year, we met with all our municipalities at the end of 2018. And, we discussed where we would be trimming. We provided them maps and just kind of talked about the schedule, when different projects would be worked. And they're welcome to have input at those meetings.
Thank you very much.
And I will add to that, Commissioner Belser, in Columbia, Missy Gentry, the assistant city manager, does an outstanding job working with us. She has the foresters, the arborists for the city that work with her, and they're very good sometimes at helping us resolve disputes. If a customer sits there and they're going back and forth, and we're going back and forth with them, then they'll come in as a third party and they'll look and they'll verify, hey, this particular tree, this particular cut is appropriate, and things of that nature. And so they really help us resolve some individual disputes as it relates to trees too. They're actively involved with what we do.
Oh, and that brings up a question. Wasn't that an agreement that the City of Columbia reached with y'all with the last dispute back 6 or 7 years ago over in Shandon? So is that something y'all would be willing to offer to the city and the county?
In Charleston?
Yeah.
We'd be agree to do the identical thing we did in Columbia down there.
At least offer that to them and tell them let the county and the city know that it seems to be working well in Columbia. It might be something that they could work with y'all on down there.
Yes, ma'am, we will. Thank you, Commissioner
Thank you.
Belser.
Thank you, ma'am. Just one quick question, and appreciate both of y'all being here today. Mr. Sam, you were talking about, missing the 5-year cycle and storm season coming. Are there any financial type grants that are available? Declaring it as a hurricane area or with FEMA or is anybody ever? I'm asking just for information because I've never heard of anything, but I didn't know if there was something that could be that sort of designation, being in an area that's had hurricanes and going to have hurricanes. That's always a.
No, sir. I'll just have to say the question on government assistance always comes up after the storm passes through.
Sure.
And just like Governor Haley, when I went with her, there were 3 questions asked, 2 of me. Why is my power out? When will my power be back on? And then the question of her is, when are we going to get our FEMA money? And so it's always after the storm. So I don't know of anything. All I can do is assure this commission that we recognize the sensitivity of the various neighborhoods we serve. We try to be good stewards of those and that streetscape. We do take aesthetics into consideration. You're always going to we will never satisfy everybody. That is not an expectation that I have when I get up in the morning. We're going to try to maintain the safety of the system as best we can. We're going to try to be prudent allocators of the funds that we have budgeted for tree trimming to get the most out of them. And then we're going to work with the communities that we serve, just like anything else we do, in order to receive input, be respectful of the stakeholders, and try to balance the interest that they have with the interest that we have of operating a safe and reliable system. It was interesting. I watched some of the meetings that y'all had on the merger with Dominion, and one of the things that is a merger requirement is to maintain the levels of reliability that we have here on our system. Well, a big part of that is tree trimming, it's safety, and it's reliability. So I know that I can't let those 90s become 100s, and I sure can't let it go back to 147 and 176 because our customers are used to having a high level of reliability and also a high level of safety. And if you were to come to my office, the thing I'm most proud of are 4 trophies outside my office where our transmission and distribution crews rated the highest safety performance for 4 years across the entire industry. Those awards mean a lot because they contrast what happened on November the 16th of 2006 when you actually lose an employee and then you're focused on safety, and this is a big part of that. And it's a balance. We're not going to make everybody happy, and I apologize for that. I feel for those folks. I've gotten calls directly from residents on James Island. Heck, I'm kin to some of them. But, it's the same thing about we've got to trim the trees. And I know that it's just like the situation in Shandon that Commissioner Belser talked about. When you first go in there, it is a shock. It's like somebody throwing cold water in your face, ice water in your face. But then once you're in there and you start working it and then it starts going, and You know, we've had situations, safety situations, where people are encouraged in the neighborhood, park your vehicle under the work. Park it under the tree where they can't get there to work. Well, that doesn't solve anything. We've had folks that say, well, film them while they're working because it slows them down and they take more time and they're more careful. So we take all of those and we take all that in stride. That's the business that we're in. That's what we signed up for. And we're going to treat people with respect, and we're going to treat them with courtesy. And if there are any funds out there, Chairman Randall, that are available for us to do anything along those lines, you know, we certainly will try to do that as we go forward. We're working in Beaufort County now on a transmission line that has a scenic highway associated with it. Mr. Cassis is in the middle of that. He seems to be in the middle of all these things, but he represents us well, and he will seek to balance and broker a solution. He's got a lot of experience with this, and that's what we're going to try to do. So you got my pledge that we're going to try to work this out in a reasonable, balanced fashion, taking into consideration the uniqueness of the communities we serve.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all being here, and I appreciate the challenges, having been a mayor in a city with an electric system. So,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize Senator Sandy Sims. She's in the audience. She's very active in this problem, and thank you for coming, Senator.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate you being here. Commissioners, anything else?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just
yes,
a
sir.
short thing.
Yes, sir, Commissioner Hamilton.
Sitting here through this afternoon and realizing that the problem that you encounter with tree trimming and this organization, that one of our primary responsibilities is reliability of the investor-owned companies that we oversee. So you're between a rock and a hard place a long time. And it's not limited to Charleston or Aiken or Beaufort. I'm from Marlboro County, and I promise you they just as the same way about the trees. And on the Charleston County Council, I believe any local government elected official will be willing to help work out any solution that he could find to help the problem, because I'm sure those voters are calling him or them as much as anybody else. I appreciate it. Appreciate the job you do.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamilton.
Thank you. Anything else, commissioners? Mr. Kassam, Mr. Branham, thank you for being here. Mr. Burgess, thank y'all for being here. Ms. Edwards, thank you for being here. And we thank everybody. Senator, we appreciate you coming to our meeting today as well. And we are adjourned.